in the night, which is halfway exactly between the sunrise and the dawn, which is not usually midnight, but is maybe 11:26, and that's quite a point which you say muntasif. So he said muntasifa, intasafa, means the cone split in half. So it could mean that the value of Sayyidina Umar becoming Muslim was the weight of half of the nation. Or it could mean that he split them in half. Wallahu a'lam, but that's the hadith from Sayyidina Ibn Abbas. وعن ابن عباس أيضا, also from Ibn Abbas, رضي الله تعالى عنهما, we say عنهما because we're talking about Ibn Abbas. Abdullah is the son of Abbas, both of whom are Muslim. لما أسلم عمر رضي الله تعالى عنه نزل جبريل عليه السلام. So when he became Muslim, Jibril descended على النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال يا محمد, he said, oh Muhammad, استبشر أهل السماء بإسلام عمر. He said that the people of the heavens, the denizens of the heavens, meaning the angels, they took glad tidings when they heard of Umar becoming Muslim. So Umar became something important. His Islam wasn't just like anybody else's. It was a milestone, historic milestone in Islam. And it's related in the Bukhari on the authority of Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala anhum. مَا زِلْنَا عِزَّةً مُنْذَ أَسْلَمَ عُمَرٍ. He said that we became mighty and we remained mighty. We remained empowered after Umar became Muslim. So whatever time it was, Umar's Islam was very significant. And some people say if we take the story that it took place during the Hijrah, if you can imagine that you're far, far away, missing your home, not really able to practice your Islam fully, because remember that the rules of Islam haven't been revealed yet. So people didn't really have the daily practices that we have. The Fajr, the Dhuhr, the Asr, the Maghrib, the Jum'ah prayer, the fasting of Ramadan, the fasting of Mondays and Thursdays, the fasting of the white days of the month, the giving of zakat, the giving of sadaqah. None of this was revealed. It was all about tawheed. And there was a prayer, but the prayer was the tahajjud prayer, which, according to some people, wasn't the farad prayer yet. According to some, it was the only farad prayer. So it was something which was very difficult to establish as a community. So they were really yearning for this Islam. And they were yearning for any news which could become... Again, they have to decide, you're going to wear it or I'm going to wear it. Okay, they have this feeling. So if it was Sayyidina Umar that became Muslim at this point, and this, you can imagine that would encourage people to want to come back. Others say, and this is the second of the stories, is it was Sayyidina Hamza. We also already talked about Sayyidina Hamza's Islam, and I'm just going to go over parts of this, just as a kind of revision, because I think we were up in the other building when we talked about Sayyidina Hamza. So we said that Sayyidina Hamza became Muslim after Sayyidina Umar, but before the Hijrah to Abyssinia, according to Al-Halabi, who we were reading from. But according to others, including Tabari, it came at this point. Wallahu a'lam. But what we do know is that he became Muslim because his nephew, and his brother, because of course the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is not just the nephew of the Prophet of Sayyidina Hamza, is the brother through milk, because they were born at the same time, and they were milked from the same mothers. Several of the mothers fed Sayyidina Hamza and fed the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, making them brothers by milk. So they're very, very close. They grew up as pals. They grew up playing together. They grew up fighting together because they each had their own qualities. Sayyidina Hamza was very strong and bulky in his build. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was very thin, slim, and very quick. And when they wrestled as children, Sayyidina Hamza used to usually throw the Prophet, or used to be much stronger than the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was much quicker and much more accurate in his arrows and in his ability to throw. So they grew up together, and when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was being insulted and abused by Abu Jahl. One of the people who hadn't become Muslim yet, who was in the house of Jud'an, who was where the Hilf al-Fudul had taken place. Now she was now looking after that. She was a servant in the time of the Hilf al-Fudul, the famous contract with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And it's significant that she came out, she saw what was happening and wanted to intervene. But she didn't intervene, rather she waited a few minutes and then Sayyidina Hamza came. And she told him what had happened. And he'd just come back from the mountains where he'd been hunting. And immediately he took his bow off and he struck Abu Jahl in front of everybody across his head with the bow. And then Abu Jahl, all of his gang, so to speak, who were around him, got up to fight. But Sayyidina Hamza didn't back off because he wasn't scared of anybody. He wasn't scared of anybody. And they said, are you defending him and defending his religion? And then Sayyidina Hamza said, it's not his religion, it's my religion. And at that point, he hadn't embraced Islam. He went to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He went home and then he became disturbed because he'd become Muslim but hadn't become Muslim. So he went to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and explained what had happened. But he said he was Muslim, but he wasn't really. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam placed his hand on his chest, made dua, and then he says, how do you feel? And then he became Muslim. And what happened was that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam had transmitted, so to speak, complete certainty into his heart. Now you might think, how does that happen? How does that happen? Sorry? Mu'jiza, perhaps. Or maybe it's not such a mu'jiza. It is a mu'jiza. But it's not. It's a mu'jiza that you can actually understand. And for this, I just want to track a little bit about connections between people. Now, as you know, the last time I was here, I had to look after him because my wife was just going into hospital and she's still there. So it's been a long time. It looks like it's going to continue to be a long time. But one of the interesting things that has happened over these weeks is there's a brother in Singapore who became Muslim, Chinese brother, who specialized in Reiki. If you know, Reiki is like massage without touching the body. So it's like you just rub energy, so to speak, over the body. And he said, can I do some Reiki on your wife? I said, I'll do anything you like. She's in intensive care on life support. I'm open to anything. In fact, there was a church in Eaglesham. They wrote to me and said, could we do Mass? I said, go ahead. And St. Bridget's Church did Mass 4 weeks ago. And then they wrote to me, phoned me after and said, is she any better? I said, sorry, sadly, she's still in a coma. They said, okay, we'll do Mass next week. Oh, fine, just go ahead. So, with his brother, he said, I'm going to send energy, Reiki energy, to you. Okay, and I don't know whether it works or not. She's improving and she's getting better. I don't know whether it was the Reiki, but it's something that does happen between people. The transference of tranquility. It's really important because perhaps she hasn't recovered from the Reiki, well, maybe she did. But certainly, whenever I used to come, when she came out of her coma, and she was in sort of semi-coma, she was waking up to get angry. And she was very angry because she just lost 10 days of her life and she didn't know where they went. She was very heavily sedated and didn't quite understand what was going on. And she thought that I'd taken her to prison and locked her up and stolen all her clothes and lots of other things like that. So she was kind of not 100% there. And she was giving the, you have to go if you want. If you want, you have to go. But one of the things that used to happen was that as soon as I would come and hold her hand she would become calm. To the extent that the nurses used to wait for me and used to ask. As soon as I could see one particular night, she just used to say, so glad you're here. And I could just imagine she'd been giving this lady a real hug, because of course she thought this lady was a prison guard who stole her clothes as well, and had to put this tube down her throat and taken her heart out. Lots of other things. So, but this holding of her hand really made a big difference, because it transmits peace. Now, why am I saying this? It's because it's really important to understand how about closeness, touching. And I'll give you one story which I was teaching one of these perpetual 1 week courses where 2 teachers come and teach all day long, really intensive course. And this one guy, he was always there, always at the front row, really happy. Then he came up and started, he says, I've got a few problems. I says, okay, go ahead, tell me what your problems. Started to talk about his problems. Why do you... Okay, you want to... Now you're happy. Okay, just stay here. That was cool, right? Alright, picture over there so they could listen to that. But, okay, no problem. I was talking about touching. Goodbye. And he went on and he said, and I worked out that he'd actually come to the Dars not because he wanted to learn anything, but because he was escaping from his wife. This is the truth. He admitted it. He said, I've got such a miserable life at home. I really want to just get away from us. I thought, I heard about this course, which is 1 week long, and you sleep in the mosque. So I ran away and attended the course. And I said, well, that's not a good way to deal with marital problems. Doing a 1 week course in a mosque far away from you. She said, how do we do this? Okay, tell me what she told me. I said, okay, do you want me to come and see your wife? He said, what? Would you come? I said, do you think it's going to help? So he phoned her. And he said, there's this sheikh. He said, I don't want to speak to no sheikh. And then eventually, after a couple of days, she said, okay, if it means you're going to come out and bring the sheikh. She put a word before the word sheikh, an adjective, which you can't repeat in the mosque. So the sheikh came along, and I came off duty. I took off just my normal clothes. And of course, I'm a professional teacher, and she's a professional teacher. So we came in, and she didn't realize I was a sheikh, because I came and asked, oh, what class do you teach? She said, year 3. Oh yeah, year 3 is difficult. And I started talking. I said, when were you last Ofsted, the inspection in England? And she's kind of getting really confused because she thought I was a sheikh. And then after a while she says, are you really a sheikh? I said, no, I'm a teacher. And she said, no, he's a sheikh, he's a sheikh. I promise he's a sheikh. I said, look, okay, he thinks I'm a sheikh, but I'm a teacher. Do you want to talk? Do you want to solve this problem? She says, yes. And she's just about to start. I said, no. I'm not going to talk to either of you until you hold hands. Okay, I'm going. It's nice talking to you, but I'm not. Unless you follow my conditions or we don't talk. Okay, I'll hold his hand. Hold his hand, hold her hand. So they held hands. They'll hold them properly. Okay, now tell me. And as soon as she was holding his hand, you could see that the anger was different. She was angry, but it was a different kind of anger because they were holding hands. Now the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ talked about the importance of a husband and wife holding hands. And that's why I started with this. Then a month later I came back and I went to visit them and they says, we're very happy. I came back 4 months later and she says, I've never been happier. I came back 6 months later and she says, actually, when I said I've never been happier, that was then. Now I've never been happier, I'm pregnant. And alhamdulillah, the next time I went to visit them, which they had their baby, and they lived happily ever after. But I think it was that touching, that holding of hands was the key. Now when you think about this, how energy, so to speak, is transmitted, tranquility is transmitted, how peace is transmitted, is ultimately the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is the man of Sakina. And when you look at the word sakina in the Quran, you use the word sakina in Malay or not? No? But you know what the word means from the Quran. Sakina means tranquility. But often when it talks about sakina in the Quran, it actually doesn't mean tranquility, it means iman. It actually means in some verses, وَأَنْزَلَ عَلَيْهِمْ sakina, and iman descended upon them. Although it means sakina, it means their iman increased through sakina. An example of this is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Battle of Badr, sends down rain just before the Battle of Badr. Actually, was anybody here the class yesterday? Oh yeah, today's Friday, isn't it? Yes, you were there. There's something I missed. I told you that in the Battle of Uhud, they retreated to the mountain, and then the sun rose. No, the sun reached its zenith, and the Quraysh pulled back. The companions all fell asleep. According to one of the narrations, the companions all fell asleep. And when they woke, they felt refreshed. And the hadith describes how it was sakina descended upon them. And of course, they'd gone through this intense battle, and it was a test of iman. So when you have this sakina, and of course, you have in, I know you have dapan or atas. Is that right? Yeah. And there's another one which is the sukun. I don't know what you call that. What's that? The sukun called? Dapan. I thought you know the dapan is the dhamma. Mati. Oh, Mati. Okay. Now that in Arabic is called sukun, which means it doesn't move. All the other harakat are called harakat because harakat means move. So sukun means to stay still. So when you stay still, you have sakina. And iman is associated with being firm and still, and not always panicking and rushing. So when the Prophet Muhammad now I know why you like the Malaysians so much. Huh? Okay, so that's what happened on that occasion. And after that he became firm. The other lesson that we learn from that is not only about how important it is, and that's also why shaking of the hand is so important in Islam. And musafaha is something that you should make sure that you do. When you greet people, shaking of hand is part of one of the big sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And alhamdulillah, so this is important. But also that sometimes people have doubts even though they've said shahada. People have doubts even though they've said shahada. And that doesn't necessarily negate their iman. It doesn't mean that they're bad people or they're in a bad state. It means that they need that sakina. And it might be that all you need to do is just put your hand on their chest and it goes. Or it might mean that you don't need to physically hold their hand, especially if it's one of the sisters. Be careful. But it might be that you just need to spiritually hold their hand. Just help them along that path. Okay, so that was Sayyidina Hamza. So these are the two stories. And the third one is a bit confusing and has been corrupted because of Salman Rushdie. Because of course Salman Rushdie talks, his most famous book is Satanic Verses. And what's the story behind the Satanic Verses? Do you know? What did he write? On what did he base that story? He based it on a false narration, which was when the Surah Al-Najm descended. Surah Al-Najm, of course, is the first surah. It's the first surah with the sajda. So there was no, of course, Surah Iqra was revealed before that, but the sajda wasn't. Only the first 4 verses were revealed. 4 or 5, I can't remember, were revealed. And then the rest of it was revealed later. But Surah Al-Najm is the first surah that descended with the sajda, and it descended at the Kaaba in front of the Quraysh. But we know this is true. So far this part of the story is correct. So Surah Al-Najm descends. And of course, Surah Al-Najm begins, وَالنَّجْمِ إِذَا هَوَى مَا ضَلَّ صَاحِبُكُمْ وَمَا غَوَى وَمَا يَنطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَى. And then it continues where it says, أَفَرَأَيْتُمُ اللَّاتَ وَالْعُزَّى وَمَنَاةَ الثَّالِثَةَ الْأُخْرَى. Have you seen Allat? And of course, we've talked about Allat is one of the idols. Al-Uzza is another one of the idols. وَمَنَاةَ الثَّالِثَةَ الْأُخْرَى. That's the third of the idols. So this surah we know is correct. We know this is part of the surah. And when these words were revealed in front of a big gathering of Quraysh, they stopped and were amazed that the Quran recognized these three gods. And of course it doesn't praise them. They attribute female names to God, and they hope for boys, meaning in the Arabic language, like Walid ibn Mughira was considered to be the great man because he had 10 sons. When the Prophet ﷺ's own grandfather had 10 sons, he decided he was going to sacrifice the last one. So the idea of having boys is considered to be great, and that having girls is considered to be very bad. In fact, in those days, what you do with them is you just dig a hole and throw them in it. So it's not praising in that sense, but it mentions them. Now, what Salman Rushdie mentions, and he attributes it, or those who support him attribute it to Tabari. I read a Tabari and I couldn't find it in the way that he described it. But it then goes on, according to them, it then goes on to say, لَهِيَ الَّتِي تَرْتَجِي. Actually, this is found in Halabi. Is that when this happens, Shaitan appeared and he read these words, لَهِيَ الَّتِي تَرْتَجِي, and they are the ones that you aspire to or you hope for. Shaitan whispered this to the Quraysh. He didn't whisper it to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and none of the Muslims heard it. None of the Muslims heard it, and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not say it. But when it came to the sajda at the end, all of the Muslims made sajda because it was a command to sajda, and so did the Quraysh. And this part we know is true. Now this is the story of the satanic verses. And when the story gets, to put it back in the context of the Seerah that we were talking about, when it gets back to the Hijrah, to the people that are made to the Hijrah, and you finish your salah now? Okay. I'm not quite sure what method you were following, but this you pray. This is one of the reasons that they can return back. They return to Mecca. It's because they hear that all of Quraysh have become Muslim, or all of the Quraysh have made sajda with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, I think because it's controversial what I've just said, let me explain what I understand to be the truth. First of all, Shaitan's intention is to mess up people's heads. That's his intention. And there's a very, very important book that you should read, which is called Minhaj al-Abidin by Imam al-Ghazali. Fairly certain it's Minhaj al-Abidin. And in it gives a list of Shaitan's plans. Number one, he wants to make you do kufr. And if he succeeds, he doesn't need to go to plan 2. There's no plan B. If he's failed that, he does plan B, plan C, and he has 8 plans. And one of those plans, for example, is ujub. Is it when you pray so well and you recite so beautifully that everybody loves you. And if that doesn't work, because you're so humble, you realize, no, I'm not going to recite for people ever again. I'm only going to do it on my own. I'm only going to recite beautifully, recite those long surahs. I'm just going to do short surahs when I'm in the mosque. When I'm home, then I'm going to do the long ones. This is also one of Shaitan's plans. Because then what happens is when you're at home, then you find ujub in the salah. When you're praying on your own, nobody's there to listen to you except yourself, but you think, that was a nice recitation. Shaitan's got you. He stopped you from doing it in the mosque, but he got you at home. And Minhaj al-Abidin explains all of these. So that's one of the things you should read. But one of the things is Shaitan always has this plan, and usually it succeeds to some extent. But he does manage, even with the prophets, to cause confusion. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, مَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن قَبْلِكَ مِن رَسُولٍ. We have not sent any of the prophet, any messenger before. وَلَا نَبِيٍّ, or no prophet, إِلَّا, except إِذَا تَمَنَّى أَلْقَى الشَّيْطَانَ فِي أُمْنِيَتِهِ. When they wish for something, or when they hope for something, Shaitan mixes up what comes down. Also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَيَنْسَخَ اللَّهُ مَا يُلْقِي الشَّيْطَانِ. But Allah wipes out whatever Shaitan has thrown. Okay, first you take my kufiya, now you take the mic. How would you? You're not making this easy, are you? Do you know that? It's a good job these people all got sabr. You know that? Huh? What do you mean that's because they're Malaysian? You better sit there. Okay. فَيَنْسَخَ اللَّهُ مَا يُلْقِي الشَّيْطَانِ. Allah wipes out whatever Shaitan has thrown. So here, if At-Tabari had said it, that Shaitan had messed up or intervened in this revelation, then it's not inconsistent, it's not haram, and he's not gone. But the truth is that nobody heard it except the disbelievers. And that means that Shaitan threw it into the minds of the disbelievers, which is why the Muslims were so shocked when they all made sajda. And all of them made sajda except two people, and they were Sa'id ibn As and Walid ibn Mughira. And one was because he was too big, in fact he couldn't make the sajda, and the other one was because he was too proud. And what each one of them did, they took some turab, some dust from the ground, and then they rubbed it onto their forehead. What? You're not supposed to comment, right? Okay, so that's the third story of why the Quraysh, why the companions came back. What I wanted to mention now is that after they came back, after they started to come back, a group of Habasha Christians also came back. Now, this is an important story because this delegation of Christians, there's two delegations that come to the Prophet ﷺ in the Seerah, and they're very, very different. The first one is this delegation, which is from Ethiopia, and the second delegation is a delegation that comes from Najran, which is in the Arabian Peninsula. There's a group of Christians there who come to Al-Madinah many years later. And you know this story, it's quite an important story as well, is that they camp in the mosque basically. Of course the mosque is open, and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam allows these 80 people, 80 Christians who come in a delegation to argue with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he lets them stay in the mosque for weeks. He lets them pray in the mosque. He even lets them pray in the mosque. You can see the gentleness of the Prophet ﷺ. And they just keep asking questions, asking and asking, but the questions that they ask are just out of intellectual arguments to try and trick the Prophet ﷺ. There's no intention of conversion until eventually Surah Ali Imran is revealed. And Ali Imran is an important surah because we have a Fatiha which encompasses the whole Quran. Everything in the Quran you'll find in the Fatiha in a summarized form. And then you have Surah Al-Baqarah, and all of the rules of Islam are found in Al-Baqarah. Okay, you read that one, I'll read this one, okay? And of course, Surah Al-Baqarah refers to the story of Bani Israel. And most of the Surah Al-Baqarah, when it addresses, this is Ya Bani Israel, Kuru ni'matul lati an'amta alaykum, or it talks about Ya ayyuhan nas, O you people. And when it, on a rare occasion, I think there are one or two verses, Wallahu a'lam, where it says Ya ahlul kitab, it refers to Bani Israel. But in Surah Al-Imran, it continually refers to Ya ahlul kitab, and very rarely mentions Ya Bani Israel, because this surah is addressing the Christians. So Al-Baqarah addresses mainly the Jews and the tradition of Sayyidina Musa, and this surah, Surah Al-Imran, addresses the Christians, but in particular, the Christians of Najran. And at the end of it, at the end of the first, not at the end, about 100 verses it reveals, there's 100 verses which it talks about Christianity, and at the end of it, it says, you bring your children, and we will bring our children, and we will call down the curse of God upon us, and we will call down for Allah to descend the curse upon the liars. And then he calls Sayyidina Ali Karamallahu Wajhah, he calls Sayyidina Fatima, he calls several other people, and he says, okay, call your people, and we will call Allah's curse upon the liars, and may they be destroyed. Because Allah has just called them to do that. And at this, they stop, and they leave. So this delegation, you can see, it has a specific type of Christianity. And you'll see this kind of delegation, ouch, all around at different times. And they may not be Christians. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm embarrassed. But, so that's the later delegation. The delegation from Habasha is totally different. Because the people of Habasha, Ethiopia, are soft and they're gentle. And they come to Mecca when the Muslims are very low and weak and have no power. So it's like okay. You know, when I used to visit Malaysia more regularly, it was usually I was invited by kind of big people out there, and so usually the mosques that I taught in were like Putrajaya, like 20,000 people, and it's all like princes and all kind of. They're not particularly interesting, but it's nice, different, and it's nice once in a while to do that kind of thing, and kind of mix with, oh, he's the Prime Minister, oh, he's the Deputy Prime Minister, oh, he's the former Prime Minister, oh, and that's the Saudi Ambassador. It's kind of, sometimes it's nice. Now, when people come and ask me questions out there, it's because they think I'm a sheikh. Because I remember the first time I went to Putrajaya, the Royal Mosque, isn't it? So there's always military guards outside, and all of the official delegates, they arrive in cars with their protocol and their badges, and everyone has a room. And there's kind of loads of protocol. And of course, I just turned up there. because on my pals, I've got some pals out there, I went to see them, and they said, don't worry, we'll drop you at the mosque. So they drop you at the mosque. Of course, when we get anywhere near the mosque, the guns are pointed straight at us. You can't go any further, who do you think you are? And the transition, he's one of the speakers, let us through. People get the gun, because of course they know that this kind of gambling could be a terrorist target. And then one of the guys turns around and says, what? And of course my picture was on the top of the mosque. I thought it was up there. Because I've never been to any one of these events before. I thought I just turned up in the photograph. Yeah. And so, it's true, he is one of the speakers. And there's all these phone calls. One of the speakers has turned up without a protocol. What do we do? And then there's this mass panic, and all these soldiers come running out to escort me to where I'm supposed to be. It was quite funny, actually. And of course, that's a different kind of place. So when people meet me out there, if people come up to me and they think I'm Shaykh, of course, here nobody thinks I'm the Shaykh. You all know who I really am. Now, if somebody comes here and asks me questions, it's very different. And I remember a group of people coming from a farm, actually not farm, forest. They've been camping in the forest for years. And half of them were totally stoned. They've been smoking ash for days in the forest. And these guys just turned up on my doorstep to ask about Islam. And the one that was the most sold took Shahada that day, and the others, most of them took Shahada over the next kind of few days, depending on how long it took to sober up. But now, how I understand the difference between the delegation of Najran and the delegation of Habasha is when they came to the Prophet ﷺ, he had nothing to give them. He had no power, he had no status, he has nothing. Why would they come to him? Why would these hippies come out of nowhere to come and meet me? Except that they have some purity in their hearts. Which is why most of them took Shahada, eventually. But even, with no disrespect to the people that came to me in Bustajaya and other places, I got to kind of take things a little bit differently there, because perhaps they think somebody, or maybe they want something. And people come and ask, oh, so you're in England, can I take your telephone number? Because of course they're thinking of maybe I can do an electric invitation. People want something. So when these people came to the Prophet ﷺ, they came purely because they wanted the deen. And this actually caused a lot of conflict in the community, because why would people come from Ethiopia to see this man? It caused a lot of panic among the Quraysh, among the non-Muslims, because his influence is now spreading everywhere. His influence is now spreading everywhere. And that people are actually coming to Mecca, not because of Mecca, but because of him. And these Ethiopians are really important, because the last time a delegation of Ethiopians came to Mecca, they came with elephants to destroy the Kaaba. So we don't mess with these people. So, this is quite an important event. And it's described in the Quran, which is why I wanted to get to the Quran directly. Because they arrived, these 30 people arrived, and Allah, they talked to them about Islam. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when it's revealed, when it was recited to them, so they came to ask more about Islam. And so the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, إِذَا يُتْلَى, tulya means to recite. When it was recited to them, قالوا, they said, آمَنَّا بِهِ, we آمَنَّا. Who knows Arabic grammar? Little bit. Those who do know fi'l madi or fi'l mudari? Fi'l madi, past tense. آمَنَّا, we have believed. Now that means that one of two things. Either they already believed because what they believed was just being confirmed. In other words, they believed in Islam before the revelation, and the revelation just confirmed it. Or amanna, meaning for definite, because it could be used past tense in this sense, could be used for definite. Wallahu a'lam, I think the first one is the correct one, and that's what most of the Mufassirun said. قالوا آمنا به إنه الحق. Surely it is the truth. من ربنا, from our Lord. إنا كنا من قبله. This confirms what I said is strong. إنا كنا من قبله. Indeed, before that, إنا كنا من قبله مسلمين. We were already Muslims. We were already Muslims, or we already submitted. أولئك يؤتون أجرهم. They will be given their ajr, their reward. أجرهم مرتين. They will be given their ajr مرتين. بما صبروا, because of their steadfastness. ويدرعون بالحسنة السيئة, and they turned badness into goodness. ومما رزقناهم, and what they provided for, ينفقون, they gave in charity. So this is one of the qualities. وإذا سمعوا له, and when they hear all that rubbish from Quraysh, when they hear Quraysh trying to distract them with their سمعوا له أعرضوا عنه, they turn away from it. وقالوا لنا أعمالنا ولكم أعمالكم. And when they hear people talking rubbish, what do? لكم أعمالنا لكم أعمالكم ولنا أعمالنا. You have your actions, we have our actions. سلام عليكم, peace be upon you. لا نبتغي الجاهلين. We don't want this jahili. We don't want this ignorance. So these verses in Surah Al-Qasas were revealed at this time. Ooh. You remember last time he was here? He didn't say a word, did he, during the whole dance? Huh? Until Seerah came in. And then he swallowed the cake. And then he went crazy. But he was crazy from the beginning. Huh? I believe there's a lot of time. Okay, right. So these verses sort of came down at this time, and it showed the power that Islam was now attracting. But the power was not physical power, it was spiritual power, and it was from the purity of people. And there's also another lesson in there, is on how you discuss things with your people that come to you. And there will be people that come to you, and they will be asking you all kinds of questions. Right? For months and months and months, they will be asking you questions. And sometimes they will be like the people of Najran. And sometimes they will be like the people of Habasha. And you need to be able to understand the difference to be able to respond. Because if they're the people of Najran, be patient. But in the end, they don't want to know. Give them the answers. And I remember in one email I wrote to one particular person, I answered all his questions, and I said, don't ask me any more questions. Because it's clear you're not interested in the answers. From the sources that you're using, if you really wanted to know these answers, you wouldn't go to those sources. So don't waste my time again. I've done my duty and answered your questions. And then he apologized, and he said, it's true, you identified my sources, and I'm sorry. And he was quite upset. And he kind of switched from being people of Najran to perhaps being the people of Al-Habasha, and Allah guide it, inshallah. Okay, that's where I'm going to stop now, because that's the kind of the return from Al-Habasha. And the next big event is when they did arrive back and they saw the power that Islam was now attracting, they decided they had to stop this. And the way that they decided to stop it was a complete boycott. And that's what they're going to make fun. So I'm going to stop there, and if there are any questions, inshallah, I'll try and answer. One minute. Yeah, they're Christian. Both of them Christian. The people of Najran were Christian, and the people of Habasha were Christian. It's interesting that in this tafsir, some people say they weren't Christians, they were Muslims, and that they had actually become Muslims in Habasha through the da'wah, so to speak, of Ja'far ibn Abi Talib and others. But most of the sources of Seerah imply that they didn't become Muslim. And most of the tafsirs say when it says inna kunna min qabli Muslimin, that before that we were Muslims, it means that we were naturally Muslims, not that they had embraced Islam before that, or that they believed in the Prophet ﷺ as he was, because of course there were Christians who believed in the Prophet ﷺ, but he hadn't arrived yet, so they were just waiting for him. When he arrived, they believed it. And these are the people, it said they will have لَهُمْ أَجْرُهُمْ مَرَّتَيْنِ, they will have their ajr twice, because they believed in the Prophet ﷺ before, and they believed in him afterwards. And when this verse is revealed, according to some, it was revealed again when it was talked about Abdullah ibn Salam becoming Muslim. Many years later, the verse was revealed the second time in Medina. And some people say it was revealed the second time, but the Prophet ﷺ recited it, relates to Abdullah ibn Salam. And another narration says that he recited it to his wife, Safiya bint Huyayy. Safiya bint Huyayy, who was only one of his only wife, so to speak, who was previously of another faith. I mean, she was previously from a Jewish family, and she was previously Jewish, and her uncle was a rabbi. And when one of the wives referred to her as Tilka Yehudiya, that Jewish girl, so out of jealousy they used to refer to some of the wives, the Jewish girl, they wouldn't say his wife said Sophia. She became very, very upset. And then the Prophet Muhammad recited this verse and said, you have your ajr marratayn, you have your reward twice. And then he said, go back to whoever says that you're referring to as the Jewish girl, to say, yes, I am the daughter of a prophet, and I'm the wife of a prophet, because her ancestry was from Sayyidina Harun. So she's a descendant of the Prophet Harun, she's the wife of a prophet, married to a prophet. So that's what that verse refers to. Yes.
Is there any one section in the Muslims after the Hijrah, or is there any more delegation from the Muslims?
No, eventually almost all of the companions returned home. The only one that is known to die is Ubaydullah ibn Jahsh, who became Christian and died there. And of course, the last of them was Sayyidina Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, who returned after the Battle of Badr. So for a while there were no Muslims in Al-Habasha, because they all came back. But of course, Al-Habasha doesn't become Muslim. It's not a Muslim. Ethiopia is not a Muslim country, but there is a large Muslim influence. Most of that comes much later on. So the Muslims of Al-Habasha, they claim that their ancestry comes from the time of the Negus. But historically, it's not proven. But most of them became Muslim about 300 years ago, 200 to 300 years ago. So that's probably more accurate. What? Please. Wa alaikum salam. Yes.
How do you identify whether your practice you make or come to
Okay, this is a good question. And I need to go over yesterday's dars. Part of yesterday's dars was a question. Sayyidina Yusuf was in darkness on two occasions. One when he was thrown in the well, and the other when he was in prison, when he was in this dark state, physically. And according to the tradition, it's mentioned that Sayyidina Jibreel came to him every day when he was in the well. But when he was in the prison, he came nadiran, occasionally. He came occasionally. And I asked the question, do you know why? And there were some suggestions, and then in the end I told them the answer was, why? The answer was, when he went to the prison, he said, that prison is more beloved to me. I would prefer to go to prison than what these women are calling me to, meaning that what they were doing. So in some ways, the prison was partly his choice, whereas the well was none of his choice. And so sometimes things in life, okay, you haven't got wudu. Go over there, you broke your wudu. You need this one. This one has the same verses. What do you mean you don't like translation? Okay, honestly, put your head down there. Okay, so sometimes I was giving this example. An example is the story that I can tell you of my own situation from the last time I was here. The last time I was here, I said my wife has just gone to hospital, so I'm looking after her, and she hasn't come back yet. And as I mentioned, she was in intensive care for many, many days, and all the doctors had run every test they could find and they could do, and nothing came back positive. And up until today, no one has found the cause of why she had total respiratory collapse. But the lesson that I learned is that sometimes things happen to you which are completely from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You don't. You are a naughty boy, you know that. Huh? I mean, you're playing a game with us, aren't you? So here, this is something which is it's not by any choice. And I was relating this back to the Prophet. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, if there was any moment he would go back to in his life to live forever, it was when he was in Uhud. And he'd just been hit, and he was alone with just 10 or 20 close companions. And it was a very difficult time for him. He said, if there was any time in his life that he would want to go back to and live that forever, it would have been that moment. So here, what I was trying to say was sometimes you have situations in your life where things happen to you which are not in your control. And it might be that there's a moment where you get the greatest blessing in your whole life. And you might be fasting and praying and doing all of these sort of things, but it might not match 1 minute of the calamity that Allah sends to you. And that's what I was saying. So the sister was saying, how do you know when it's purely from Allah or when you've influenced it or by your choice? That's a good question. There are certain situations which are just so obvious. Which is just so obvious that this is not of your choice in any way. And that the difficulty you've been placed in, you can feel the pressure, but at the same time, you know that the only way out of it is submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's word. And there was a point where one of my doctor friends in Norway, he'd been following my wife, and he had actually seen her the week before in Norway, he visited Norway, and they examined her there, he and his wife examined her and ran some tests. And he wrote to me, he said, you know, sometimes when you're a doctor, you just have to accept you don't know. And you run every possible test, you do every possible thing that's procedure, and you just realize you don't know what's happened here. And usually that's to the point where they're so close to death that you tried everything, you just have to accept you don't know. And you have to just think about keeping them alive. And if you keep them alive, eventually they often just get better. And you didn't do anything except do the procedure to keep them alive. And I thought, this man has such wisdom. Of all of the doctors, he spoke the truth, but I thought he's a Muslim. The next day I came to the intensive care, and I brought one of my doctor friends. two of my doctor friends. One of them is a very nice doctor lady, doctor friend, Dr. Norma, who is assertive what she wants, but she's very polite. But she has a friend who is very, very harsh, and she gets what she scares everybody. So the two of them came in, and the doctors were so scared of them, but they were just hiding. Eventually, the phone and said, "I want to speak to Dr. Anderson." Well, Dr. Anderson's left. Okay, she went out of it. She got a mobile phone. David Anderson, I want to speak to you now. Says, I'm just leaving. He says, I'll meet you in the lobby. And then they went. So this conversation. And then they had this conversation. Next day, the new doctor came. The doctor came and he says, look, I don't want to argue with you. My job is to keep her alive. You go and find whatever cures you want. You do whatever tests you want. That's other people's jobs. My job is to keep her alive. And it came to me. But that's exactly what the Father had said the other day. Is that sometimes you just have, when it's quite clear you can't do anything except submit. Is to wait and just see that. Just put his hand out. So the answer to this is that sometimes you can just see that if you do something, whatever you do, if you're doing something can help, then perhaps you've got some part in this. But when you do nothing, and the only thing you can do is do nothing, and submit to his will. I remember somebody asking me, so what's the prognosis? I'm tired of talking about what's wrong with her. I just says, we're waiting for Allah's decree. Any of these doctors could do. Even the one that said, my job is to keep her alive. What he meant was, I'm going to do my best to keep her alive. He didn't say, I can keep her alive. He said, I'm going to do what I can to keep her alive. He didn't say, can cure her. And when I said, we wait for his decree, either he takes her to him, or he sends her back. This is his decree. And when you're at that point where nothing you can do can affect the situation, you know that Allah has put you there. You can't move left, you can't move right. And every single one of us has been there at some point. I can remember a brother, he was here in this university, Shaykh University, Malaysia. I don't know if everybody's conditions are the same, but if you fail, it's not an easy life. And if you fail, then you, in effect, have to go back. So he was doing his master's, I think, and he failed his dissertation, but he had a family. And his grant was cut. I don't know if he failed twice or what it was, but he basically had nothing to do except go home. And he wanted, he'd been here for 5 or 6 years, he wanted to. It was really tough for him. So alhamdulillah, he managed to find a job as a caretaker at one of my schools. And that day, somebody had given me zakat and gave a condition. He gave me a lot of money and he said, I give you zakat on condition that it doesn't leave Glasgow. And I said, where am I going to find somebody that fulfills the requirements of this zakat? I went to school and I found this guy cleaning tables after school. And then he told me a story and how he hasn't got any money. And he's cleaning tables, just waiting for Faraj, just waiting for Allah to save him. I said, I think this money was sent to you. And I gave him this money and he cried. Because that's the amount of money he needed to pay for the 3 months fees, which would mean he could submit his dissertation. And that's what, no, he didn't choose that. He didn't choose that. And if you now look at him, he's lecturing in the University of Malaysia, you would never imagine that he had that difficulty. And I think that of all the time, he was a wonderful, wonderful man, pray 5 times a day, fast the sunnah fast, beautiful akhlaq, and everything in Hajj. But I think that perhaps Allah gave him the most when he was in a difficult state. So you know in your heart, when you can't do anything to get out of it, it's probably Allah that puts you in that place. And some people see that in everything. They just submit. Okay, I'm going to bed now. If Allah brings me back, He brings me back. And if He doesn't, He doesn't. And that's actually the dua that we make. إفتك وضعت جنبك إن أمسكت روحي. If you hold my ruh, show it mercy. When I'm so and if you send it back, protect it, save it. So this is how we should reach that level, inshallah. Sorry, that's a long answer. I'll have to go over this for the first. Any other questions before this? Or demands more chocolate? Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. Thank you very, very much.